like any questions or comments. And then I'm hoping that next time, the third session, we can sort of do some little case studies and question and answer and apply some of the information, because I know it's so much material that I'm trying to present, and it's a big volume in a short amount of time. But I'm hoping that then next time we can go back and review and talk about maybe some clinical cases that you might have, and check, if we can explain anything better or differently. I'm hoping having the PowerPoints helps, but I know when I looked back at the first one, I could see there was so much that we covered. So, okay. So I think when I put my screen on to present, I can't see anybody. So just shout if I need to stop or slow down, and Wendy can be eyes and ears on the faces. And hopefully the connection will work. Oh, yes. Ah, perfect. Sidebar. Yes, I got it. Thank you. I know it felt strange last time, but I didn't want to mess with things that were happening. So, okay, off we go.
And
Now
then, I'm
let's
sorry, Meg, I know we talked about this last time. Do you want to record it? Perfect. Great.
And I just have to find out, I had it all set up, and of course here we go. I think this should share. Can people see that? Oh, okay, perfect. All right, that's what I wanted to make sure. So last time we looked just at these 4 areas. We looked a little bit at anatomy, physiology, medical issues that we might experience, such as breathing issues and digestive issues. And then we also looked a little bit at some of the sensory stuff. And we will come back to that a little bit more next time. Let me see how. Oh, I didn't know it could do that. So the next thing we wanted to talk about when we're problem solving with feeding problems is, having looked at the medical, the physiological, the sensory piece, looking at the feeding position, because that can have a huge impact on how kids feed, whether they're successful and safe, or whether they are inefficient, and whether it actually becomes dangerous for them to feed. So we talk a lot about feeding position and whether or not that is functional. So there's lots of ways to, oh, sorry, I have to go back. I'm pressing my screen too much. So a functional feeding position, we're going to look in a minute at the mechanics of how children should ideally be positioned, but a functional feeding position should feel safe for the child. And that's a really big thing. If the child does not feel safe, if they feel as though they're going to fall, if they feel as if they're going to be dropped, then they won't feel safe. And as we talked about last time, if a child doesn't feel safe, they're not going to want to eat. So we want to make sure the child feels safe and secure. We want to make sure that the feeding position minimizes any medical complications. So that might be if the child has contractures in their joints because of cerebral palsy, if they have a medical condition, something that requires a splint or something like that, if they have a digestive problem, we want to make sure that the feeding problem does not make that worse. We want to make sure that the child is not working too hard to be in that position. So the child might need a little bit more support to to save their energy, to conserve the energy and stop them getting too tired. So we want to make sure that the child can stay in that position for maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes without getting really, really tired. We want to make sure the child can use the skills that he has in that position. So if the child is learning to use a spoon, we want to make sure that we position him in a way that lets him do that. If the child has some head control, we want to make sure that we're not restricting that. So we want him to use the skills he has. We want the child, again, to feel relaxed, and to be positioned so that the child can engage with the person feeding him or her. So we don't want the child sitting on the floor and the parent standing talking. That's going to feel strange and the child won't be able to engage. So we're always looking to make sure that it's a good position for communication. The child can see the feeder can see the child, they can read each other's cues, and that's really important. Want the child to be comfortable. We don't want any pain for the child, whether it is because the surfaces of the chair are too hard, too scratchy, too rough. Perhaps the child is underweight and sitting on a hard surface causes a lot of pressure. Perhaps the child has some chronic constipation and has discomfort if his knees are too high. We want to think through that and make sure there's not too much pain. And we also want to make sure the child can move a little bit in that position. We don't want the child to get into one position and be stuck. So in terms of the mechanics, when we're looking at a child feeding, we think of the mouth, everything that's happening with the lips, with the tongue, with the jaw. But all of those structures, the feeding structures, are all balanced on the spine, and the spine is stabilized by the pelvis. So if you imagine kind of sitting on one hip, just like on one buttock, and trying to eat or drink, it's really difficult. We need a straight spine. We need a pelvis to be nice and as flat as we can get it, so that the spine, the shoulders, the jaw, and the tongue all are all in a line. That keeps everything symmetrical. And when we're looking at feeding, we really want symmetry, because we want the two sides of the jaw to be working in a coordinated way. So we don't want to lean too far one way or the other. We want everything to be nice and straight. So we want the hips and the shoulders to be flat, facing forward. We want the lungs and the abdomen to be nice and open. We don't want to be hunched over like this. We talked about that last time, just that pressure on the abdomen, the lungs not being able to open enough so the child can't breathe well. We want to be nice and upright. We want the shoulders to be nice and stable, because these are kind of like the table that the head and the jaw sit on. So we need this to be stable. It's like trying to eat a bowl of soup on a table that's tippy and wobbling. It's really, really difficult. So we need a lot of stability here. And then we'll have some looking at this. So this is for older children, and we won't talk too much about this because it's the basis of pediatric sort of handling and positioning, which we could probably talk about for a whole other 10 hours, I'm sure. But in general, for feeding, we're looking for these things for an older child, a child that has hopefully got some ability to sit upright, eat some, hopefully eating some solid foods. So we want the hips at 90 degrees, the trunk, so the core nice and upright. We want the shoulders to be pretty level, again, kind of making this table. We want the feet to be nice and flat. And then we're trying here to get a nice, like 90-degree angle for the knees. If the knees are too high, then it can really put pressure on the stomach. And in children with cerebral palsy, if we lift their knees up too high, sometimes then the top of their body will kind of come forwards. So this is a nice position for this little boy. His head is a little tilted and you can sort of see that angle there, but really quite a nice position. So always looking for symmetry, looking for the child to look relaxed and to be able to engage. Infants, it's a little different, and again, depends on how old the infant is, but still trying to sort of get that straight spine, the 90-degree angle here, 90-degree angle here, trying to get the shoulders forward. Because if the shoulders go back in a child with really high tone, then typically their neck goes into hyperextension, the tongue goes back, and then it's really, really difficult to feed. So we always want to try and get the shoulders forward, the head a little bit forward, not too far forward, and just those joints roughly at 90 degrees, and just the child feeling secure and safe and comfortable. There is actually a really big appendix of about 30 pages that I've put in here with so much information about positioning. So you'll have that to look at after. Just another example, this is a little boy with some developmental needs. And again, this family isn't using a wheelchair or a sort of an outside device, but just using the mother's body to maintain that positioning. So shoulders nice and forward, again, flexion, flexion, and this kind of nice 90-degree angle here. And again, a similar example, just using a chair set up. And I have some, okay. And so once we've got the hips sort of stable, the trunk aligned as much as we can, shoulders horizontal as much as we can, a lot of the kids, certainly that I work with, do have difficulty with alignment. And so often see these kinds of positions here, like the neck just really, really hyperextended. And if you put your neck in this position and try to take a sip of water, it's difficult, but it's also quite frightening. You can't control the water. It's hard for your tongue to control the water. Your tongue gets pulled back. And feeding can be really, really scary and challenging. And it's worth trying. I thought I understood, but once I tried sort of trying to take a drink in these positions, you realize how hard it is and how little control the kids have. Here, again, with the head to one side, very often the food or liquid goes into this cheek, but then they have to push it back up and down the throat. So really tricky. And here, I couldn't find a good picture, but I was trying to show a child with their neck really flexed, their chin really, really tucked to their chest. And again, that's a really, really difficult position for feeding. So always something we want to look at right at the beginning is just that positioning. And I know this is probably a review, just a really, really quick review. There's a big appendix at the end of it, and it talks what we've talked about. Wendy and I sort of put this together, but talking about how we want to try and get the right position before we start feeding if we can. And that might involve adding pillows. Like here they've used, these are towels, I believe, or maybe bed sheets that have been rolled up, again, just to try and get that flexion, some foot support, shoulders forward here. The appendix talks about reclining the chair as well, just putting a little raise under the front, and that can just lean the child back enough that their head can rest on the shoulders instead of coming forward like that. And sometimes just a really small recline can make a huge difference. Well, in the appendix, it talks a little bit about that, talking about foot support for a child who might not have great strength, might not have great posture, maybe a little unsteady or be worried about falling. Foot support's really important, easy to add, but important. There's lots of pictures about adding in just really simple adaptations to keep, so this little boy, if we imagine that his head would go like this, they just built just a little padded wooden block to keep his head upright. So you can see how that would help him be more successful at feeding versus going over to the side. Here, again, some more adaptations, just putting little boards on a tray to bring the shoulders forward. So for a child who tends to be like this, if we just bring the shoulders forward, the head will usually come forward as well. So these are just examples, and there is a huge amount of information in the appendix. I can show you in a minute. Sometimes just having a little tray or table in front of the child can be really helpful. Some kids actually do better sitting on the floor, particularly if they have some worries about falling, or if there isn't a chair of the right height in the home. Sometimes floor is the way to go. And here I was just trying to show, lost my cursor. Yeah, you can just putting arms or just gentle sort of Velcro supports to keep the arms forward. So there's lots of ways to modify the sitting position to try and get what we're looking for, which is that symmetry, stability, feeling of safety, and that alignment. And when we can get that, then the oral structures are symmetrical, aligned, and they can work together so much more efficiently. So yeah, I think it's a long way down, but yeah, you'll see the appendix. In the appendix as well, just for reference, we also put in a lot of illustrations, just different ways to use your body to position the kids. And this can be really helpful. We know that not all families have, high chairs and chairs of the right size. And a lot of the equipment is commercial, and families don't have that. And we know it's expensive. So I really like to look at using the parent's body to provide support. And there's lots of illustrations in the appendix, different ways these pictures all have little kids on them for some reason. They were just examples, but in the appendix, there's lots of pictures of how you might be able to feed an older child by changing your position, or having two people use their bodies to help get a good position for a child. So I did put those in. And then just alternative strategies, again, just an example, but for a child who has difficulty with like the feeling of being laid down or a child who, if you lean them back, maybe their tone, maybe they have cerebral palsy and their tone gets really high, which happens to a lot of kids with cerebral palsy when we tip them back. If they have high tone, everything tightens. So sometimes positions like this, for nursing or for bottle feeding, depending on what the mum is using, can really help to find it can just help to find a better way to feed the child that works with their skills and their comfort. So I put a lot of examples like that in, just different ways to think about positioning. And then there are also some examples for specific conditions. So for example, children with reflux, will often do better nursing in a position like this one here. At the bottom, the mum there with the baby on her knee, because the baby is upright and very, very stable. So there are also some examples of positions like that you might use with reflux or with constipation, with high tone, with low tone. So there's like 30, 40 pages of illustrations. So I hope that's I hope that always helps. That's all right. I lost all the faces. I don't know what I did, so I'm so sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Kirsty, we're all nodding our head.
For some reason, it's got my voice coming. This is because I had a voiceover for it. I just have to try and cancel myself. I'll come back to that one. Okay. Another thing that can be really useful, and in a minute we'll look at some really specific ways of doing this, but this seems to tie in with positioning for me, is often as therapists, we're looking to provide some oral control. So not forcing the child to do anything, of course, but just providing support and feedback, and helping them to control the movements of their jaw and their tongue, because that can be really hard for our kids. They have difficulty controlling their movements anyway, and then these are movements that they cannot see, right? So it's really hard for a lot of our kids with disabilities even to control movements that they can see, like reaching for something. It still takes a lot of practice. And so when they're moving their mouth, they can't see at all what they're doing. So with our hands, we can give some feedback and sort of show them what it should feel like. And we'll look at some really specific ideas in a minute, but we can provide that support in front. And there's also ways to provide it from the side or behind. And there might be different reasons why we might want. I always like to be in front because I think it's really nice for communication, and you can read the child and the child can read you. But sometimes I find for children with autism, face-to-face can be too much emotion, too much expectation for them to process as while they're trying a new food or trying something different. So I sometimes find for those children, it's actually a little easier to be beside or behind, to the side or behind, like in this second picture here. So I just wanted to show that these things, we're going to talk all about these in just a minute, but I just put it on there. Okay, so these ones, this is just kind of giving some ideas of how we, and again, this is just sort of for reference, and I just thought I would put it with the feeding part. These are different finger configurations that we might use to provide that support. So this one is usually called the L shape. And again, that's something we would do if we were sitting in front. And if we just go back to the other slide, I forgot to copy this picture but this is the one I find I use most often. It feels really natural, and you can support the jaw and the chin. Uh, I can't do it without a mirror. I need to do it on someone. But yeah, so this is also from in front. I just forgot to carry it over. I'll fix that. So they're sort of the two ones we would use from the front, and then just different ways of providing that support um, from the side or from behind. This one here, it's hard to show, but with this pattern, because the adult's hand is so big, generally there's also some pressure here through the pinky finger on the sternum. I can't tell how much of me you can see, but like on here as a point of control. And that can just really help the child just kind of get grounded and stable with their core. So I like that one a lot, because you're supporting the jaw, but you're also kind of providing some input through the bones of the ribs and providing that stability. This picture as well here, you can see that the lady just with her hand is also providing that while she's feeding. And the little girl in this picture here, she might not need that, like the hand shouldn't be keeping her upright. If she needs the hand to keep her upright, she probably needs more complicated straps or a vest of some kind, but just to give input for her to feel secure and safe, and just that stability. And if we stabilize the sternum, it really helps to stabilize the shoulders. And if the shoulders are stable, the jaw is stable. So I just wanted to include those. I know when I started working with little kids, I never quite knew what to do with my hands. Like I wanted to facilitate and support, but I didn't know what to do with my fingers. So I really like having pictures. Oh, of course. No, and I think it is hard. I'll try and see if I can enlarge some of the pictures. This one uses the thumb up here. So the thumb is sort of stabilizing on the like on the TMJ. Yeah. And both of these, yeah, I agree. I think this is pretty similar on the chin here. I don't know if you can you see my cursor? Do you okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if that translated. But yes, so this one is generally it's sort of a lower level of support, I guess. Yeah, no, and when you asked me, I was like, I know it. It's like one of those find the difference pictures. I was like, what? They look the same. What did I do? Yeah, it's that thumb. Okay, let's see if I can. All right. Um, Oh, and again, this is a little repetitive, but again, just showing, giving that little bit of control there. And this one, I love the idea for a child who doesn't need a lot of support, just giving that input through the shoulders. It keeps, you can kind of see here, like it's keeping those shoulders forward, which will stop the head going back. So I really like that. But when I put the picture in, I was like, I don't like standing over the child. Like that felt really weird to me. I don't know why this mom is standing. So yes, I added that. So don't stand over the child, of course, because my thoughts were then the child is going to look up at their mom and hyperextend their neck, and then we've lost our good positioning. So I thought I liked the it was like a controversial illustration. It's kind of halfway good, but then doesn't quite make sense. All right. Okay, and then more positioning, that's all at the ends. What do we have? Did that make sort of rough sense? There's so much about positioning for feeding. We could talk and talk for hours and hours and hours, but I just thought if we looked at kind of the basic principles, and then it's one of those things that is so individual and varies so much depending on what the family are comfortable with and what materials are available and the child's tone and symmetry and skills. So it's certainly not something where there is just one solution. But I figured if we just reviewed the principles, it would, yeah, just be a good refresher of things to look at. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm fascinated.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think culturally they're gonna be more receptive to something that is them using their own body for the positioning versus a chair. Especially with how much that can translate between different settings when they're feeding not inside the home and don't have access to the chair that's been provided to them. I think it just culturally is gonna make a little bit more sense to use the strategies that are using their own body for the positions.
Mhm. That makes sense. Yep. Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think they breastfeed for longer here too than they typically might in the United States as well.
Mhm. Mhm. So that definitely is an opportunity. And I think it's sustainable too. One, they can do it if the position is comfortable for the mom and the child, they can do it in different settings. And if they're breastfeeding for longer in for the child, then I mean there's all kinds of implications that helps with attachment. That there's so much to that. So that's actually I could see that being a really important educational piece for the moms.
It's actually one of the pieces I added in. Megan, compared with the version that I had sent you before, one of the things I put into this version of the slide thing was about like another 10 pages of different sort of breastfeeding positions and specifically positions for different kind of combinations of needs. So I'm glad hopefully that will be the pictures will be useful, but that's really good to know.
Mhm.
Sí, sí, pero tal vez porque Tal vez tú me puedes ayudar a traducirlo, porque ahorita no se me, o esos términos, a mí no sé, yo no sé esos términos, pero ¿qué pasa con los niños que ya tienen cierta edad, que ya pueden comer algo más sólido, pero que no hay control de cabeza, no hay control de cuello y de hombros, porque ellos son quienes usualmente se hacen para el frente y que, como dijo Lindsay, por las necesidades que tenemos en la comunidad, pues no, los papás no tienen una silla, no tienen una silla de madera incluso, ¿verdad? Sino es solo banco. Entonces, en estos casos, o en la cama, ajá, como dice Sandra también, los papás usan las camas. Entonces, en esos casos, como que ¿cómo podríamos ayudar nosotros, verdad? ¿En qué estrategias podríamos brindar en esas situaciones, aparte del recostarlos o usar el mismo cuerpo de los papás, verdad? ¿Algo extra de eso? No sé. Sí, y aparte de eso, ¿qué estrategias se pueden utilizar? ¿Verdad? ¿Qué otras formas podemos utilizar para, para apoyar a las familias en este sentido? Sí, eso. Así es, cuando ellos ya tienen una edad para poder comer sólidos, porque aquí, o sea, sí, entiendo este punto, pero está como muy enfocado a cuando su comida es muy líquida, ¿verdad? Pero hay niños que ya tienen edad para comer sólidos y que los papás les dan, por ejemplo, aquí les dan tortilla, ¿verdad? La tortilla es algo bastante duro. Entonces, ¿qué pasa con esos niños, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo podemos colaborar de una mejor forma?
Yeah. Tangling. Absolutely.
Sí, 3 años, 4 años todavía. Ajá.
Mm, okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, like a blender.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. You're working in two different languages. Mhm.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really good point. I tried, yeah, if you can still see my screen, there should be some slides that look at using surfaces, like using the corner of like a corner wall, or even just constructing like a little L shape from wood that's the right height, and that might give enough support, assuming it's you know, a child with, I'm just trying to think where the other pictures are. I'm just trying to this. Yeah, of course.
No, es que estaba pensando mucho aquí en en nuestro contexto, que aquí no es como que pasen los niños o hagan esa transición entre semisólido y sólido, sino aquí es la transición usualmente es de breastfeeding a comida sólida, a tortilla, a frijol, a arroz, ¿verdad? Maíz, o sea, de verdad es una transición bastante drástica. Entonces, pues, ¿en qué posición podemos colocar al niño para hacer esta transición y que ellos puedan tener una alimentación o una posición, mejor dicho, una posición correcta para el tipo de alimentación? Porque esa es la realidad que tenemos, ¿verdad? Esa, exacto. Uh-huh. Es bien drástico. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's so going from breastfeeding to pieces of tortilla would be pretty typical. So not going through I'm just trying to think.
Like a puree or even like a banana.
So not sort of going through like mashed bananas, plantains, mashed beans, egg, avocado. People wouldn't typically go through that.
Mira, fíjate que a nosotros se nos fue el internet un buen rato, entonces nos desconectamos. ¿Podrías tú solo explicarme un poquito rapidito? Porque se nos fue el internet. Sí, te escucho. Y es que estaba consultando también con Sandra, que también conoce mucho de esas transiciones aquí, y en realidad es muy poco. No, aquí, por lo regular, se pasa de esa transición o a veces se hace en conjunto. mientras están dando algunos momentos del día les dan pecho o breastfeeding y en el almuerzo ya es una tortilla con frijol, ¿verdad? Así es como lo hacen aquí. No hay como, son muy pocas las personas que hacen como hacen esa transición un poco más larga, en donde dan cosas, son más semisólidas como fideos, arroz o papillas, para después pasar a algo más sólido como la tortilla, pero en realidad es muy poco. Aquí se podría decir de que el niño come bien si se comió 2 tortillas, ¿verdad? Entonces, en realidad es muy poco que un almuerzo o una comida sea tan variada, incluyendo verduras y aguacate, ¿verdad? Entonces, por lo regular no hay transiciones o diferencias o paso a paso, no hay pasos, sino hay cambios. Sí, sí, es la forma es la forma en que todos están aquí. Es algo normal y está dentro de la cultura. Ujú.
Más o menos.
Yeah, roughly, roughly. But a summary might be good to make sure we got it right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And so
Yeah.
for a typical child, it would be abrupt but manageable. But for a child with disabilities, that's got to be a lot of change at once, right?
Yeah. So I'm
Wow.
wondering, are the children, are they having a hard time managing that? Are they choking? I mean, have they observed, have Mary Cruz, have you observed that?
Megan, sí, otra vez.
Or coughing?
Pues depende mucho de la edad del niño. Por ejemplo, si es un niño, eh, no sé, un ejemplo es Marjorie, ella tiene 2 años. Una niña de 2 años sí suele ahogarse, pero un niño de 4 o 5 años, eh, el mismo contexto hace que el niño vaya desarrollando habilidades cómodas para él, ¿verdad? En donde él solito busca la forma de tragar sin ahogarse. No es cómodo porque se ve en el rostro, pero, pero es la, ay, ¿cómo se llama? Es el mismo instinto de sobrevivencia que hace que el niño desarrolle otras cosas, porque sí, yo lo he visto, no solo aquí en Santa María, sino en la Antigua, con niños que tal vez tienen el recurso que acá no tienen, pero no hay mucho, como no hay mucho interés en los niños con parálisis o en los niños que tienen mucha dificultad para tragar, entonces el niño es puro instinto de supervivencia el que ellos vayan desarrollando una forma para tragar sin verse, sin ahogarse. Te lo digo porque eso pasa en obras sociales del hermano Pedro y yo estuve haciendo ahí mi práctica y ellos así, ellos solitos descubren la forma de poderlo hacer solos porque no hay apoyo de nada, ¿verdad? Mucho menos de la familia, de nadie. Algo muy similar pasa aquí, porque no, aquí por la falta de conocimiento y tú sabes todo esto, entonces el niño descubre la forma de hacerlo solito, ¿verdad? Pero un niño de sobrevivir a la situación, entonces es muy rara la mamá que se toma el tiempo de investigar o de hacerlo, para que esto no suceda, ¿verdad? Entonces, un niño de 2 años que apenas está descubriendo cómo alimentarse, ahí sí hay complicaciones, ahí sí se ahogan, no quieren comer, comen muy lento, y qué más he visto, lloran, ¿verdad? Porque no es cómodo comer así. Entonces, es la forma en que ellos comunican que no pueden comer así, ¿verdad? Pero, o si no comen, hay desnutrición. O si no comen, hay desnutrición, ¿verdad? Y también ahí uno se da cuenta de eso.
Right.
Yo soy como mixto, digamos, con la formación, porque como impostado.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I heard de obras sociales.
Mm. Mm.
Right. Yeah.
Mm.
If they can't figure out a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and that was the way it was done to you, and that
Right, and your grandmother and
And
Yeah.
it's yeah, yeah, right. Built into the yeah.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because working on feeding anywhere, anytime, it does take a lot of time. It's, it is something you have to put time into, and families are so busy, and there's
Resources are so
yeah,
low.
and there's
Absolutely.
so much immediate stuff that your families have to take care of and attend to and manage, and yeah,
Yeah.
I can absolutely see that.
Do they have much in the way of local fruit that the children are eating? Like you said, aguacates or bananas. I mean,
Ah, creo que sí, creo que sí. Solo también a lo que estábamos hablando quería hacer un comentario. Esto, aparte de ser un tema nuevo para mí, pero sí he visto cómo es la alimentación de algunos niños e incluso estaba bajando libros y recordando en una ocasión que una mamá hace tiempo me comentó, fueron dos mamás, una que tenía un niño con discapacidad y la otra que tenía un familiar que sufrió de un derrame cerebral. Entonces, no podía comer nada sólido. Aquí en Santa María tenemos la ventaja de tener de todo para comer, pero las personas no comen frutas, casi no comen verduras, comen lo que ya se ha mencionado, ¿verdad? Frijoles, tortillas y café, porque eso es lo que le dan a los niños, café, comida sólida. Entonces, y las personas no saben cómo poder, por ejemplo, hacer una papilla o un banano, o comer un banano y hacerlo papilla para darle al bebé. Entonces, yo creo que es una realidad que se debe trabajar. Sé que no hay en muchos lugares, como mencionaba Maricruz, en obras sociales, en muchos lugares, no saben, no se sabe cómo alimentar al niño, solamente es sobrevivencia. Y aquí hay recursos como verduras, frutas, pero no se usan y tampoco se sabe cómo prepararlas, porque he tenido esas dudas de las mamás y ellas me han preguntado alguna vez porque ellas no saben y solamente dan comida sólida y si no pueden comer eso, no comen. Pero a veces hay cosas sencillas que ellos no saben.
Mhm.
mhm.
Wow.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Are the beans just given whole, like just as adults would eat them? They're not sort of
Mashed
mashed
up.
or overly overcooked? That.
Sí, aquí, sí, no, aquí es todo entero. Si le vas a dar un banano al niño, le das el banano. Si quieres, si van a comer frijoles, es el frijol en semilla. Entonces, no, aquí no hay, como tú dices, aquí casi no hay licuadoras, porque también si utilizas una licuadora, es un gasto de luz, ¿verdad? Y no hay el recurso para pagar mucho de luz. Entonces, no, casi todos los electrodomésticos no hay. Algo común también acá, y algo común también es que comen muchas hierbas. Todo el tiempo en casa hay hierbas. La mayoría de familias tampoco cocinan, todos compran comida. Y la comida que venden, siento yo que son muy pocas las mamás que cocinan. La mayoría compra porque venden bolsitas de 2 o 3 quetzales de comida. Lo común aquí es comprar revolcado, pepián, frijoles, a veces hierbas también, y venden bolsitas de 3 quetzales, a veces hasta 1 o 2 quetzales, y eso es lo que comen con tortilla. Entonces es súper común que pase casi en todos lados.
Anna, wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
speak up. Yeah, pumpkin seed. Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Es, no, pero lo que usted dijo, eso fue lo que yo mencioné, Mega. Eso fue lo que mencioné. Solo agregar tal vez que a veces yo lo que he visto es que no les gusta mucho comer frutas y verduras aparte de. Entonces siento que por eso no hay mucho consumo, porque prefieren comer café, Coca-Cola, eh, algunas otras cosas que no son de alimento, pero lo que sí es de alimento no les gusta mucho. O hierbas, las famosas son hierbas.
Interesting. Coffee.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. That's so interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Mm. Right. Mm.
It's
Yeah. Right.
right, right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It sounds like if they don't know the concept of transitional foods, or they're not, that's very foreign to them, to then bring in a seeding device for feeding may just be too much. Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe some of the positions where they can use, where they can use like their legs or
Yeah.
like use their body to
Mhm.
provide that support. Um, I'll see if I can find some more examples as well. I've got a few pages, but would that seem more acceptable if and is it usually just one mother in each house, or would there typically be sort of, I'm
Extended
thinking,
family.
yeah, for older kids, if would there typically be a couple of women in the house potentially, or just more often one? Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
No, lo que tú dijiste, cuando si no está la mamá, quien se hace cargo prácticamente de la casa es el hijo o la hija más grande de la casa,
Mhm.
o si no hay la tía o la abuelita, ¿verdad? Pero sí, eso, lo que sí, la perspectiva que tú diste, eso es usualmente.
Yeah, helping out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who might be lying flat on the
Yeah.
floor, or yeah.
Yeah.
Ujú.
Okay, that's so interesting. Some of it I knew, but yeah, there's so much that's new there to me
Yeah.
in terms of just the reality, right? Of
Exactly.
how feeding, difficulties with feeding are managed and viewed as well. Just being, yeah, like you say, survival of the fittest. You make it work, or you don't. That's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. I think it sounds like we're unwrapping a lot here. because we can talk about ideal position, but there's much more to it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, I'll try and knowing that now, I'll make sure before I send you this new PowerPoint, Wendy, that sorry, Megan, I will put in, I'll find as many sort of positions and ideas as I can for like parents positioning children or older siblings positioning children in ways that hopefully might still feel fairly natural and not too forced, but that might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Megan. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. She's working, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good to know. I will change some of the things that I included to hopefully be more, just a little bit more relevant. And yeah, it's powerful and it's good to know
is.
reality. And yeah, it's good to be reminded because we're so used to coming in and thinking, okay, there's a problem. How can we fix
Absolutely.
this?
Given our framework.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
without exactly the way that we would typically look at things. But this is such a different set of of very real needs and priorities, and yeah, families doing what they need to do, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And that's why yeah, exactly. I think knowing what we're aiming for, but understanding there's, yeah,
It may not always be feasible.
will be a different journey to get maybe part way there, not all of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So many pieces of that,
Yeah.
yeah, of the puzzle.
Mhm.
Gosh.
But I think also kind of having, talking about, like we said, just having that understanding of 90/90, and also the understanding of, and I know the reality is that parents may not want to be able to give the child a mashed up banana or avocado, but just being able to mention that to the family of that might help with the child choking. Yeah.
Yes, I'm still here. No worries. I think one of the things when working with our families is going to be not overloading them with information, because all of this is really good and helpful, but I feel like we have to ease into it really slowly in our approach with them, because if we throw too much at them, they're just going to kind of shut down, or they're just not going to really receive any of it. And so I think we have to choose the things that are what are the top priorities of all of these resources that we have at our disposal to be able to teach them to achieve small gains first and then continue building on that education.
That's a great point, Lindsay. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would be, knowing sort of what we've just been talking about, what would be the most useful parts of, because I know the whole area of feeding and swallowing and positioning and strategies to manage individual problems like tongue thrust and all of these different things, like what would be most useful for you guys?
I'm trying to think of what would be most useful for us versus what would be most useful for the parents, because all of this is good for us, right?
True.
I
Yeah.
think one of my first thoughts is that I think the positioning is one of the best things that we can start with the families, because if they can learn how to better position their child so that they're having more success during the feeding, they're immediately going to feel success if they're able to feed their child with less spillage, and that it takes less time, because the two kids that Megan mentioned, Junior and Santiago, their feedings take a very long time. So I think if parents are able to see that even small adjustments in how they're going about feeding make it a less lengthy process for them, that's going to get them on board a lot quicker with any of the recommendations that we're providing for them.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That's great feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me try and go, if I scan down. There's tons of stuff in here that I will send you about different things. Yeah, I was trying to put in, if I can. Yeah, I tried to just put some of these are more for younger children, and I know the spoon part isn't as relevant, but there should be some different ways to kind of find different ways to support the child while still being able to feed. So, and I know a lot of these pictures just happens to have spoons in them, but hopefully could be adapted for
Tortillas or
yeah, exactly. So ignore the spoon. I did know that the spoons weren't but here even, and a lot of these I use with older children as well, but even just using the need to provide that sort of the back support, and mum could then, for example, be leaning against a wall if there is a wall, or holding herself up. But just different ways of breaking up that tone. And even, I'm just picking on this one because it happened to pop up, but being able to sort of provide the foot support, the 90-90 angle, she's keeping the shoulders round, could maybe have something here to stop the feet. But just that, and of course, every child is so different, so it's hard to have a general list of this will absolutely work. But certainly for most kids, there should be some kind of solution or way to, you know, it's difficult if the feeder is an older child because they might not be big enough, but if the older child could maybe help the mom, if they both happen to have the time to be both there in the same space for a little bit of time, you know, that might be helpful as well. I think this, let me go through. Yeah, yeah, I just realized that it will be very tricky. Some of them might work, even just sort of lap sitting. This would absolutely be hard, but certainly side sitting with both legs to the left. That's a position she's just happens to have cross legs. But side sitting that way and using her arm to come round. And I'll try and find some more that will be helpful for for bigger kids as well, because a lot of the illustrations are for slightly younger kids. I think there's yeah, again, this might be a little more difficult but for a child who tends to go into, who has difficulties with tone or not great stability, knowing that would be helpful. I'll try and find some more to do. Sometimes, again, it is tricky, isn't it, with the skirts? Some children actually do better up on their knees and getting support through their chest here for control and the shoulders forward, but you would need somebody else then to be helping with feeding from
the front.
From the front, unless the mum is really, really dexterous. And again, it all depends if the child has any self-feeding skills of their own. And that's one of the problems with feeding, of course. It's all so individual, depending on what the children can do. These were just some examples of yeah, sorry.
I was just going to ask the two kids that you have brought up a couple of times, how old are they? Okay.
Somewhere around there. I don't know off the top of my head because it looks so small compared to their actual age. But yeah, somewhere around, I think Junior is 6, Santiago is somewhere around 6 or 7.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
And what kind of skills do they have for sitting and mobility? Are they able to sit independently, or?
No, absolutely not. They're pretty severe cases. Santiago has better head control than Junior does, I would say, but both of them have very little trunk control. So it's supported sitting with everything they're doing for feeding.
And so when you say supported sitting, what kind of sitting are they in?
With Junior, usually his mom is kind of just sitting on the edge of the bed, holding him so that he's kind of sideways on her lap.
Okay.
And then with Santiago, I would say it's a similar position, but he is more reclined when she is holding him, but she has a tendency to not hold him and him just to be in supine with a pillow under his head when she's feeding him, laying on the bed.
And so is he eating a tortilla typically?
Yeah, it's like, I would say it's like blended food with little chunks of tortillas.
Okay. Okay. I think that just gives us a picture of what it looks like.
Yeah, I always come back. Oh, no, you go ahead.
It was beans.
And tortilla doesn't dissolve much, does it?
What was that?
Oh, sorry, I was just saying, like, tortilla, even if you really soak it, it doesn't dissolve.
Right.
It doesn't dissolve so much that it doesn't just kind of melt away, right? You still have to chew it a little bit and
right.
Yeah.
And you have the perfect slide up, Kirsty, that chewing is really an advanced skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of
I'm trying to think. I think he does. However, his ability to have good control over mouth movements, like he moves his jaw up and down, like he manipulates the food in his mouth, but it is not in a controlled manner. I'm talking about Santiago. But I don't remember exactly if he has teeth or not. I only watched one feeding session with him.
And that's
you are. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
carry on.
You are asking for from if Santiago have teeth or Junior.
Either one.
Junior doesn't have teeth, and Santiago, I just remember he had like I don't know, like a pieces of teeth, but yeah.
Right, so for biting and chewing, that will be so tricky. And if, like, even looking at the slide, I always like this one just because it's just that reminder that, like, if the body doesn't have the skills, the jaw won't usually have the skills. So if a child isn't sitting up by them, like usually at this stage when a child can sit up by themselves, they can do like some up, down and side to side jaw movements, like to munch on like some soft foods. But chewing like really involves more of those like diagonal twisting, much
core
more
strength.
complicated. Yeah, more core strength, more rotation. And if the child doesn't, and I just put this picture up here just because the little baby was doing some nice kind of rotation. But if the kids don't have that in their like sitting and their movement repertoire, they probably won't have it like in their oral motor skill repertoire. So it makes sense that he's kind of stuck at that stage of not being able, apart from the teeth, it makes sense that he's stuck there because he doesn't have that ability to make those controlled diagonal movements, right? He's not controlling the way he turns his body, and even with the munching pattern, that would make sense that that's still kind of emerging, like he hasn't got control over that yet. So yeah, that's such a tough it always it really is.
Absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
was trying with this to show, like, to chew a banana, like, you can kind of suck up and down on it a little bit, but bananas don't really dissolve. So you've got to do a little bit of, like, diagonal to put on. But the mature chewing, which is that like rotary pattern that we would use to process, meat, or I don't know, an apple or something like that. That's so complicated because you're keeping part of your body still and you're rotating. And that really, we don't see that until kids are kind of up and moving around and moving. And, you think of a toddler, like he goes in all directions. He can stop, he can turn, he can rotate, he can change direction. It's really complex. And that almost always will mirror the oral motor skills. So I always find that really, especially when working with parents, I try to explain that their mouth can only do what their body can do. And I see it, yeah, definitely see that all of the time. Would you agree, Wendy, with the kids you work with?
Totally. I love this visual because it really does break it down with what you would expect the child to be doing with their body at these different stages. So 100%.
And I think it stops us going mad as therapists when we can't get to the next stage because kids get stuck at a certain stage. Like maybe the child over here, and I know there's not a lot of the transitional feeding, but here, for example, a child who was maybe just eating like smooth foods like applesauce, oatmeal, that kind of stuff. Often children get really stuck at that stage and can't move on. And sometimes it's sensory, but sometimes it's just those kids are not crawling yet. They just haven't got those diagonal patterns yet. So sometimes I'll switch off a little bit and the physical therapist might do more work for a while to try and build some of those skills up.
Yeah.
Like, right. Yeah.
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 Absolutely. You're going from kind of here
Yes.
to here.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's
Developmental stage.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And you're so right about even if some kids can do it, like, and here as well, a lot of kids are skipping crawling now. But there's a cost to that in terms of building those foundation skills. I think either way, if you're skipping from, breast milk to tortilla, or you're going from, sleeping to running, there is a cost. And I think as well, like this crawling stage, or just that sort of phase of development, it's a big sensory phase because kids are moving and getting a lot of sensory input, but it's so important as well for like core and shoulder girdle stability, which we know we need to get that jaw control and that oral motor control. So yeah, that's really interesting that's a stage that is I'm just skipping through these.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's we could break it down, oral, physical, where they're skipping what would be typical stages.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're now going to look at. Oh, sorry, that's just I've got to shut that. There we go. Yeah.
Sí, sí, Megan, solo es que vieras que nosotros tenemos muy mal internet hoy, bueno, toda la semana. Entonces, podíamos escucharlas, pero no podíamos ver la presentación. Hasta ahorita estamos viendo como la presentación, pero sí estaba entendiendo de que todo, la conexión que hay entre todas las partes, que a cierta, si están gateando, pueden desarrollar, ¿no? No vi la imagen, pero podían desarrollar algo de la, como que subiendo de nivel, así como van desarrollándose físicamente y motrizmente, ¿verdad? Pero sí, sí estaba entendiendo, solo estaba tratando de leer ahí. Sí.
Oh, oh. Well, what I could also do, if it's helpful, Megan, is yeah, I could also just record the presentation separately and send it to you with sound if that's easier as well. Because I'm just missing pieces. Whatever works for you guys is totally fine. Uh, oh, oh yeah, I can do that. No, the discussion is fabulous. I'm so glad to know this, and then
Yeah.
that will really help us be able to be, because I was just focusing on just general, like the typical sequence of feeding for typical kids, because I feel like if we need to understand that before we can understand atypical feeding. So I was looking at that, and then at really specific issues that might come up, such as particular places where children get stuck or skills that they need help to develop. But it's not helpful me talking about that if I don't know like the reality of what the families are working with and what the options are, right? So I don't want to waste your team's time talking about things that aren't relevant. So this is really, really good. I'm really glad that we're getting to discuss it. I think that's really important.
I mean, Kirsty, I think that what you're presenting is very important, because I do think it gives the staff a foundational knowledge that it's almost like you need to know what is typical before you can say that's not typical. So
Right,
I do think this is very valuable.
Perfect. Okay. How are we doing for time, Megan? Do you want me to keep going for a little bit? Okay. Yeah. Oh gosh. Of course. Of course. And then what I'll do is, if you guys will be, if you'll let me, I will try and just modify this a little bit to take out some bits that aren't as relevant, and then I'll resend it to Wendy, and I can do a voice recording to go with it, so that then you'll have everything, but hopefully it will mostly be relevant. And I'll put in some more illustrations for positioning as well. So you'll get a new and improved version by the end of the weekend. So I will do it. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think it will work. I think it will work. This will be, yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll just keep going for 10 minutes, and we'll keep going. So yeah, I was talking about in typical kids, usually we go from nursing, from milk, and then from that, usually, in most cultures, most countries, we would go through a transitional stage that would involve maybe milk with some cereals, some mashed up fruits, those kinds of things. But either way, once we go from liquids to taking in solids, it requires a really, really different set of skills. So the sensory skills, the child needs to feel the food or the liquid in the mouth. They need to be able to tolerate the feel of, I know spoons aren't used a lot, but spoon, fingers, the cup, whatever we're giving them, and need to tolerate all the different textures and tastes and temperatures. They, again, like we talked about, need to have the postural skills to stay upright, to keep their head on their shoulders, and they need to have some sort of control of movement. So usually the oral motor skills that we start to see is that around 6 to 8 months, kids are using their lips to kind of pull, oh, that's spelt wrong, to pull food off someone's fingers or off a spoon or off their own fingers. And that's really just a like straight out and back kind of movement. There's not a lot of rotation. It's just out, get the food and come back. And the tongue kind of just sucks a little bit at the soft food, goes forward, backward. So it's a very linear, simple movement. And usually kids at that point are kind of maybe sitting up, going forward and backward a little bit on their hands and knees, going forward and back a little bit. Then kids will start munching, so their jaw is going like, so they might do that on, say, like a soft piece of banana, something like that. Their jaw would go up and down, but also a little bit of side to side. Start to get a little bit of like the teeth grinding against each other, or the gums grinding against each other, that kind of diagonal movement right around when kids are starting to crawl, because we're getting a little bit more of that rotation of the trunk, of the shoulders. It all matches. Biting starts to happen. And then usually around 15 months, most kids typically are starting to walk. And then that's when we start to see that chewing, the rotary chewing, making that circle of sort of, I don't know if I can do it without a mirror, my poor body awareness, but kind of the chewing where our jaw goes in a circle. We can stop chewing, go the other direction. Our tongue also is going down, up, diagonal, like the tongue is going to all the corners of the mouth. And again, it's not a coincidence that that's kind of usually when kids are starting to walk. They've got those skills to move, to turn, to go this way, to go that way. So again, it's really beautiful in a way, the way everything is built. The motor skill sets the stage for the oral motor skill. So sometimes, I'm just trying to think whether this would be helpful at the moment. Let me just keep going a little minute just because we only have a little bit of time left, and trying to go through here. Yes, I put some strategies in, and I don't know if this will be helpful information or not, but I tried to put some information in about how to kind of prepare children for feeding. So whether they're nursing, or for an older child, there's some strategies on the next page, but just to kind of get everything woken up. So this would be something we could do with a younger child who's still nursing. It says 0 to 5 months, but probably could, just because usually here most kids tend to switch to a bottle at about 6 months. But you could keep doing this. So for a child that does have high tone or low tone, this is something I tend to use a lot, just to kind of prepare the mouth and get everything woken up. So just sort of firm stroking to make everything kind of activate, around the lips, on the bottom and under the chin. And that's something that certainly for a child who's maybe seeming a little sleepier, needs a little bit more time to wake up and get ready to feed. We talked a lot last time about sort of getting in that right state where kids are ready to feed. This can be just a really nice way to sort of activate the lips, and the under here should activate the base of the tongue and help to wake that up. And again, I'll go through this when I sort of I can do the voiceover. And then for an older child, this is a nice strategy if children can tolerate being touched. Some kids don't like their faces to be touched, and so of course we would be really careful, but either kind of with the 2 fingers or just a washcloth. And again, just a nice activity to go from one side to the other, up and down. Just a nice way to kind of get things woken up. Again, just sort of looking at how we prepare the child. They're both things that I find I use a lot here, and they're really nice for creating kind of that connection, that engagement. If the children like this, some kids don't, but just a nice kind of warm-up activity at the beginning of a meal. And again, sort of looking at how we prepare the mouth. If children are kind of lower tone, sleepier, need a little bit more activation, then sort of touching very, very lightly or fast, sort of a faster tapping around the mouth, that will typically kind of wake things up, kind of alerts the system. If a child has higher tone or is a little bit, just a little bit more ramped up, a little bit more aroused, we would probably just go more slowly, deep pressure, slow rhythm, very predictable with our movements. So depending on the child, we can do those activities with children with high tone or low tone, but we would just want to be aware that if we're coming in very fast and light, that will, if a child already has high tone, that will alert them more. And similarly, if a child has low tone, then doing things very slowly it might reduce their arousal level even more. So it might have an impact on how ready they are to eat. I did just put these 2 in, and you'll be able to have a look. But there's one for calming, and then there is one for alerting. And this is just just, obviously looking at the child that you're going to be working with feeding or giving advice around feeding. We talked last time about just getting them in a nice, calm, ready state if we can, whatever the disability or the need is that they have. And it's just a really nice kind of way of connecting before the meal. So I just gave some ideas of things here that might just help get the child ready if it for an infant or an older child, if they need to be, calmed down a little bit, or if they need some activities that are going to kind of get them a little bit more woken up and activate those muscles a little bit more. And I know we're out of time. I just was trying to finish in a logical oh yeah, that's probably going into a whole new set of problems. So I will probably stop here. And yeah, I think this is probably going into too much for the time we have available. So I will switch back to here.
Aww. Which one's Gladys?
Oh,
so cute.
Again, I find it depends so much on the child. I feel like a lot of the kids I work with, they need breaks anyway during the meal. Like I try to always limit meals to 20 to 30 minutes, just because any longer than that, and generally I find most of the kids I work with are they're just getting too tired. It's really, and then the aspiration risk goes up. But even so, a lot of kids find even like 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes to be a long time. So sometimes I will like give a break in the middle and go back to some of those activities, either to kind of try and reset the arousal level a little bit. And sometimes just because the kids really enjoy that connection, and it's a positive connection around feeding.
Yeah.
Where a lot of our kids, I find, they have there can be a lot of anxiety around feeding and being fed. So sometimes I will just halfway through go back to an activity that I know they like, and bring it out again, just to kind of give the message, this can be fun. Like you can be there and I can be here, and we can just play a little bit, and then we'll maybe eat some more, but just kind of to help with the pacing, especially if children struggle, like if infants are nursing, but maybe the flow is really fast, and that's really tiring for them to manage. If they're starting to choke and gag a little bit on the milk or the bottle, if that's what the mother is using, we'll sometimes like pace, give a break, let them catch their breath. We'll do some gentle massage, or depending on what they need, like pick some activities from those kinds of areas and revisit. What would you say, Wendy?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the pacing is really important, because for a lot of, I think for a lot of the kids that we see, their endurance is just not up for a full meal. So just kind of watching for their cues and knowing when they need a break. And I love the idea of having some connection with them, just to let them know that feeding doesn't have to be this anxiety producing activity during their day. And then it also hopefully will help with the connection with the therapist, but maybe eventually helping with the connection with the mom, because feeding is so intimate. So, and like I think Lindsay said, if we can help the mom to be successful and feel successful with her feeding, that I think that will help both the mom and the child. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But you are right, Lindsay, that I think some children take a long time to process and respond, or for it to be communicated physically. Like, we don't know what they're processing and responding to neurologically, but yeah, if we're trying to sort of get the tone activated a little more, yeah, sometimes it definitely, I see that like extra processing and kind of organization time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did that answer your question? Yeah. All right.
Mm.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we want it to be
Yeah.
equal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where Christy and I want to put our focus, because, we could do this training in the States, but that's not what we're doing here. We realize that we're talking about Santa Maria de Jesus. So it's very helpful for us to know, to get an idea, because you talked about Santiago and Junior, for us to kind of start to visualize what it all looks like in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Sorry, I was a little all over the place, but I really wanted to hear all of this, and that's fantastic. And I'll send the other info. So.
No, just say thank you, a big thank you to Christy and Wendy, because you guys are like teaching us a lot of things, and we can learn and we can work in how to apply with our community. So so thank you, and so appreciated for all your work and all the presentations that you're going to give us in the future. So a really big thank you.
Well, thank you for painting such a great picture of life for your families. Like, that's, we want to be able to give information that's helpful, and it's fantastic for us to know that, and yeah, that helps us do our work better. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for giving us your busy Friday afternoon time, and Lindsay, I know you don't even work today, so thank you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
No worries. Thank you both so much for being here with us. We appreciate it.
All right.
Okay.
We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.